Most people think there's no such thing as a fat vegan, but then most people don't realize that deep-fried tofu tastes amazing and that Oreos are actually vegan. That is what our next guest wrote. She's funny and talented and an animal advocate to the nines. Our next guest was, as she tells it in her wonderful autobiography, Always Too Much and Never Enough, an overweight kid who became a fat adult unable to lose the weight even after years on a plant-based diet. It wasn't until she faced her addiction to junk food, including vegan junk food, and committed to regular fasts and an unprocessed diet that she was able to break free. Jasmin Singer is the executive director of Our Hen House, a media hub to change the world for animals. Under that banner, Jasmin produces a multi-award-winning weekly podcast. She is also the digital director at VegNews, and she's been published in dozens of print and online publications. She can also be seen in the award-winning documentaries Vegucated and The Ghosts in Our Machine. Welcome, Jasmin, to the Switch4Good podcast.
I'm so excited to be here. I'm such big fans. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, I know Dotsie and I are both big fans of yours. This is the first time I've met you, but Dotsie's been on your podcast.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was too fun. It went by fast.
I read your book, and I have to say it is an amazing read. Thank you so much. It was honest, and I could relate to so much of it. So can we start a little bit? Once again, it's called Always Too Much and Never Enough to our audience who's interested in reading really wonderful, wonderful books, honest books about interesting journeys from childhood to through adulthood. So can we start with your mom and how your feelings about food and how her feelings about her food and her body affected you?
Oh, absolutely. And, that's something that I found is a universal story when I was talking to people throughout the 60 city book tour that I did. Everyone said, yeah, me and my mom too. And for me, I grew up in suburban New Jersey in the electric and fluorescent 1980s. And my mom was always trying to go from 122 pounds to 120 pounds and just get that very perfect figure as she saw it. And I was her chubby kid kind of following behind her. And I would go with her to Nutrisystem and Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers. And I was in it for the pizza, basically, because after we left, we would always go out for pizza. And that was kind of known as the free time. And little did I know that there was a little bit of an ulterior motive going on for her, which is that she wanted me to be exposed to these various weight loss industries that then kind of overtook my life for a couple decades afterwards.
Wow. So your mom took you to weight loss. At first you went with her, and then she actually encouraged you to try them, right? These Nutrisystem, Jenny Craig kind of things.
Yeah, I tried them starting as a pretty young kid because, I was chubby and it was weird because the world was telling me on one hand, lose weight, be a thin kid. Certainly my classmates were telling me that. I was a really bullied kid and living in the shadow of my completely ravishing, beautiful, head-turning mom. And so she was trying her best, as most of our moms do, and was kind of unknowingly putting her sort of body image issues onto me. But the difference is I was very far from what the world saw as a pretty kid. And she was just trying to remain the prettiest one in the room.
And was she almost competitive with you in a way, do you feel like, as you look back on it?
I have only figured that out in recent years, probably since the book came out a few years ago, have I figured out that there was a competition element. Mm-hmm. It was more sisterly than anything else. To be honest, it still is. And, I think she really did mean well. I think she was doing the best she could. But because of this, my relationship to food was really skewed really early. Like, I don't even think we owned a set of dishes. We just ate those Weight Watchers meals. Do you remember them? Like the little white cardboard things that you pop in the microwave, and it would always stay frozen in the middle, no matter how long you microwaved it.
Yeah.
That last bite of rubbery lasagna or whatever was always frozen. That was food. Food to me was a means of changing yourself, a means of losing weight and assimilating and being part of what society, or in my case, my mom, wanted me to be. It wasn't for so long that I realized that food could actually be nourishment or an extension of your worldview. That came a lot later.
It reminds me of like Hungry Man, right? Those were also frozen meals. Yeah. And then Weight Watchers Nutrisystem, those frozen meals, they were so much smaller, and it was like meals for the not hungry woman, because we're not hungry ever. And we are hungry. We're hungry for food, and we're hungry for love. We're hungry for relationships. We're hungry for a million things, but we can be big eaters, right? We don't have to sit and have this little, it's not part of our female-ism to sit there and have little bites of little things when we go out to restaurants, and that is looked upon as that's nice and okay and how it should be.
Having large appetites is not considered feminine,
right?
For whatever sex or food or fun or loud or right.
Exactly. It's like the ultimate definition of always too much and never enough. There's always too much food in the house, but never quite enough, because we always want more and more and more. And honestly, it was the industry, the food industry, the junk food industry, the meat industry, the dairy industry that was driving this whole more, actually waiting for us to become reliant onto a system that would never ever satisfy us, because it like these foods, as you know, are literally created in such a way that they hit our palate with the perfect amount of smushy to fatty to salty, and they hit that part of us that can never be sated.
Now, when you were a child, it's interesting because you say that on one hand, your mother's idea of food was that it was about being socially acceptable, striving to be. But there was another part of you that craved food so desperately, and it meant something different to you, and those two sides were battling.
Yeah, that's insightful and true. Food was my lover, my confidant, my saver, my best friend. And when I was bullied in school, it was always the Oreos or the Cheez-Its that were there for me when I got home. So it wound up being this love-hate relationship. I loved to eat those Oreos in my bedroom by myself after a hard day where kids didn't get me. It was like almost almost like a drug, like that kind of a feeling when, okay, finally I am in myself. I am being like the most truthful manifestation of myself that little 8 or 9-year-old me knew how to be. But at the same time, because of the fact that I was this participant in this food addiction and dieting industry, I was as far from my truth as possible.
It's like food in that state. I've been there, where you come home from what was school for you, or for me was later in life, so from work, from modeling or whatever, and I felt so empty from being torn down so much. And then it really does feel like it's filling you back up. You go out into the world on empty tank, you come home, fill the tank up, and somehow food is able to, obviously it's a false recognition of filling, but it feels like it's filling you.
Well, and let's relate that to any kind of toxic relationship. For me, it was food. Later on, it was toxic relationships with the wrong people. We talked about when you were on Our Hen House, it was, a lot of other substances that they're filling this void that is really unfillable as long as we're hiding behind whatever toxic relationship is taking place. And for me, for a long time, it was the dance between Cheez-Its and those little frozen lasagna meals.
So diving in, we're going to rewind just a teeny bit so that people can hear kind of the beginning. And you went vegetarian at 19, but kind of mostly because that just fit your counterculture ways and your attitude at that time. But you continued to be on a weight gain journey because there's lots of cheese and pizza and pasta and frozen yogurt. And then at 24, as you just mentioned, you went vegan for animal rights issue. But and I want to hear about that. Like, was there a moment? Did you, see something specific? But you still leaned on vegan junk food and kept gaining weight. And you got to a point where your doctor said you're on your way to heart disease. So who cares whether 100 pounds looks good on you or not, because that's not what this is about. That was about true health at that point where you were jolted. So I want to go through what was that catalyst for veganism, and then how you felt when your doctor told you that, and as you started to heal from not wanting to get heart disease, not necessarily just, this weight is off, what that journey was like.
Yeah, that's a lot. And when I did go vegetarian at 19, it was definitely because I was, a theater student who wore all black and smoked clove cigarettes. And I figured it was an extension of that. But it was also because it was the very beginning of me trying to pay attention to something that I knew on a deep level was the right thing to do, which was to not eat flesh, and I didn't word it that way for years. I said I'm a vegetarian, but not the mean kind. And, later on I became the mean kind. So when I was 24, as you mentioned, I went vegan, and it was because I was working in AIDS awareness theater. And a lot of what I was doing was advocating for the LGBTQ community, advocating for, communication tactics and women's rights and things like that. And on my breaks, I would go and eat cottage cheese, which I think is like now the single most disgusting food on the planet. Right. Like what is cottage cheese? And at the same time, I had met a vegan. The story often goes, I met a vegan, and you know what happens next. I met a vegan. She was screening a documentary, and I went to go see it. And I figured I already had a leg up being a vegetarian, even though I had never given any thought to where meat came from, certainly not dairy and eggs. And so as I was watching this documentary, I saw in front of me these dairy cows being, torn away from their babies, and these families being broken apart. And I thought of my own broken home as a child. My parents had been married and divorced and married and divorced so many times. I thought about how painful that was for me. And I saw these egg-laying hens being exploited for their reproductive parts and functions, similar to the dairy cows. And suddenly it became a feminist issue for me. And as much as I tried to avoid this searing reality, it was right in front of me. And so I realized that what I was eating, which was pretty much all dairy and eggs when I was a vegetarian, was in direct conflict with what I was doing for a living, which was advocating for less lucky groups as us and for marginalized communities. And I had no choice but to go vegan. I had related the food I was eating to the trauma that I personally had underwent as a bullied kid, as someone who was misunderstood, as someone the world for some reason didn't celebrate as much as my beautiful mother. And I had also been through my share of crappy experiences with men who took advantage of me, which felt like an exploitation of my own womanhood and my own reproductive parts. So how could I continue to consume these products?
Did you do it overnight? Were you able to give up some of the foods to which you were addicted? Because correct me if I'm wrong, but it seemed to me that although there's a lot of a psychological part to your need to eat, there was also an addictive quality to the foods. Just whether or not, whatever your mother was, however you grew up, etc., these foods are drugs and they're addictive, and you were very susceptible to that. How was it to give up the dairy and the milk for you and your favorite treats?
I was addicted for sure, and I didn't do it overnight, but I did do it within about a week. I wanted to go vegan except for this one thing that I loved to eat, which was like a vegan frozen yogurt line. I mean, a non-vegan frozen yogurt line all over New York City at the time.
Called Smoochies.
Yes, Smoochies, exactly. Like they
Smoochie's still
had.
around?
No, we shouldn't be talking about Smoochies and sending people to them.
No, I know, but it was like Willy Wonka. You know how in Willy Wonka they had the gum that you could have like your dinner gum meal and your like lunch gum meal. It was very similar. Like they had thousands of flavors, and I felt like that was a good way of satisfying my sweet tooth while losing weight because they purported to be very low in calories. So I didn't want to give that up. So I decided to go vegan at first, except for that. And I just want to give myself a tiny little bit of credit for a second, even though within a week I went totally vegan. That moment where I said I'll do it all except for this thing is actually a pretty good instinct. Because there's a lot of people who say, I couldn't go vegan because my mom makes this pot roast on Christmas or something. And to them, I say, then go vegan the other 364 days of the year, knowing full well that by the time Christmas rolls around, they won't want it anymore and they'll come up with a vegan alternative. But for me, I went vegan within a week of then because of the dairy cows and because of that vegan I met. Because I had met a vegan who thrusted me into a community of vegans who took me under their wing. Like there is a big social aspect for a lot of people in going vegan. A lot of people can't do it in a vacuum, or at least it's a lot more difficult. And for me, I instantly got a vegan family.
Yeah.
Well, you're an extrovert, so that makes sense. But to people who don't live in New York City, where there's a big community, what would you say to them? Would they go to an online community?
Well, it's a lot different now than it was when I went vegan. At that time, it would have been a lot more difficult. But now I would first challenge that person to find the vegan community in their area, because I would be willing to bet that it's there. It might not be in their backyard and it might not be within 5 miles, but my guess is it's within 20. So it might not be quite as easy as I had it at that time. And certainly an online community can be extremely important for people who live in areas that are more remote with fewer vegans that they know. And, we can also create the community. Like I love creating community wherever I go. You put out a call online or even old school, like put up a flyer at a local coffee shop saying, let's meet and have vegan food once a month. You find the vegans. So they are definitely there. And, that's where Our Hen House comes in, the nonprofit media hub that I helped to create that produces podcasts for 10 years now. We have listeners all over the world in areas countries I've never heard of, saying they're like one of the only vegans they know of, and that Our Hen House helps to provide an important kind of like through line in their life.
Of course, and also Happy Cow, if you go to a vegan restaurant, if you hang out there, you might meet some vegans. Just go to the Happy Cow app and find one. I was in Bulgaria and I found a vegan restaurant. So
that's
there
fun.
you go.
It's like a hobby. Like what can I find?
So just to go back to your story, so you became vegan within a week. But what you also discovered, besides the community, is that there are a lot of incredibly good vegan substitutes for your smoochies and for the other delicious things that you like to eat that contain dairy and eggs. Tell us a little bit about how you were feeling at that time and what this new vegan diet did for you.
Well, yeah, I found that there was a vegan answer to every kind of non-vegan food. There was a vegan equivalent, and the New York City subway system became this elaborate web that connected me from the vegan panini in Soho to the vegan Butterfinger shake in Williamsburg to the seitan piccata on the Upper East Side, and I felt it was my moral obligation to try them all. So going back to your last question, it was not hard for me to ultimately go vegan because I leaned in hard to the transition foods, and it became my obsession. And I felt that because I was finally in line with eating the way that I believed in, that I had kind of like full reign to try it all. And so I did. I tried it all. And, the silver lining there is that there is a vegan version of every single animal product out there.
And what's the not so silver lining?
The not so silver lining for me was that I had food addiction issues that traced back to my childhood and body image issues that traced back to my childhood that I had never examined, despite the fact that I had been in therapy. I had not gotten to the bottom of it. I was a 24-year-old woman and I hadn't yet, figured it out. And I'm sure figuring it out is a lifelong trajectory, but I didn't have a whole lot of perspective yet. So I simply replaced not only the non-vegan foods with the vegan foods, but I also replaced, food addiction with another kind of food addiction. And I went big.
What does food mean to you now compared to what it meant to you those years ago when you were filling Cheez-Its and Oreos?
Well, right now, the first question to me is whether it's food or not. And when I think back to the quote unquote foods I ate as a kid, I don't think many of them were foods. I think many of them were misappropriated bodies that for some reason society told me was a food. So I ate it. So first and foremost, I don't see animal products as foods. So that's the first question. Ironically, Oreos are vegan. So that brings in another layer of complication because if that is food, then why wasn't that enough once I went vegan? And for me, anything that we consume, whether it's media or food or the energies of our peers, whatever it is, if it's not lined up with our authentic self, then it's going to be something we hide behind. So the food addiction mentality for me was about hiding behind eating, as opposed to doing the hard work, sitting in the discomfort, learning the roots of my issues with my body image, learning the issues of my roots with food addiction, and then coming out the other side and making the choice to then have that seitan piccata from a place of kind of groundedness and opting in, as opposed to letting the seitan piccata rule my day, becoming the obsession that I think about from the moment I wake up until the moment I eat it and then thinking about it afterwards. That is a toxic mentality. But you can approach the seitan piccata from a place of abundance. You just have to kind of, in my case, get through the work of unpacking decades of food addiction.
I would like to get your response to something that happens, I think, to all of us almost on a daily basis outside there in the big bad world. So many times vegans are lumped in with people who eat paleo or keto or gluten-free, and we're at a restaurant and always my favorite is, well, I don't know if it's vegan, but it's gluten-free.
Right.
Yay. What the fuck? And it's also kind of really quite silly because there's about less than 1% of people on the planet that have celiac disease. And there's over 65% of people on the planet that have a severe lactose intolerance or dairy allergy. So, if you want to just get real about the science. But as a vegan, when you take that step, right, across the threshold, it is something that changes pretty much everything. It's physical, it's chemical, it's hormonal, everything that changes in your body on a deep, rich level, because finally we feel like we are at least eating in alignment with our authentic self and with our true self and with our beliefs. What do you say to people that think veganism is a diet and that's it?
Well, for me personally, I think that this answer really varies depending upon who is having the conversation. Mm-hmm. So I'm not speaking for everyone right now. I'm just speaking for me. I always make clear that I just don't want to eat anyone who had a mother, and I do so in what I hope is a way that doesn't put people off. I have a lot of years experience trying to perfect my communication techniques, but I never leave the guesswork to whether or not it's a diet. And the fact of the matter is, for people who choose to not consume animals because it doesn't align with their ethics, it isn't a diet. It's a way of existing in this world. And it's a way of boycotting things that we don't stand for, such as cruelty to, communities who never saw it coming. And that's why it was a natural extension of my early social justice advocacy in the LGBTQ community, in the AIDS awareness community. So if I'm out and about, I'll make a funny little joke about how, like, no, I'm not gluten-free. I just don't want to make sure that my pancakes never had a mother, kind of thing. And the other layer here is that everyone is in agreement that a well-planned, whole foods-based, plant-based diet can be optimal. And so if a lot of people come into veganism because of health, and, you know, that is fine. I think that the vast majority of people I talk to come in because of health and then are like less defensive about learning the ethical reasons, which is great. But it is across the board agreed upon, from the United Nations to the world-class athletes such as yourself, that a well-planned, whole foods-based, junk food low vegan diet is the best way to take care of our bodies and to avoid the main catalysts for disease in the United States, from type 2 diabetes to morbid obesity to heart disease, and on and on and on. So I think we are getting somewhere with that. I really do. I think that people understand that. I was just watching this little documentary on Netflix on a show called Explained, which is produced through Vox, and it was just about dieting and the diet industry. And they were like, you know, there were all these bubbles that came on the screen, like keto and paleo and, you know, gluten-free and all the things you just mentioned. And I was nervous that they'd throw veganism in there, and they didn't. And they talked about how these are all passing fads. And then at the end, they just talked about, you know, leaning into plants. This is not, they never used the word vegan, but the more and more you look, the more you realize that everyone is saying it. They're just saying it in different ways.
I don't think there's any dispute that a whole food diet is optimal, and then plant-based. Even the people who are into eat meat say you should eat a lot of green leafy vegetables. So there's common ground there.
And except for the carnivore diet. They don't touch vegetables. They're like off
the carnivore diet. I haven't heard of that diet,
sister. It's like there's a kind of a rage going on YouTube, and it's a lot of vegans too that are turning over to that. We'll do that on another podcast.
Okay,
it's very upsetting.
Oh my gosh! Wow. Well, we better do it quick because those people aren't going to live very long.
I know, exactly.
Jasmin, so talking about a whole food plant-based diet, let's talk about what happened. You spent years as a vegan, fighting for the rights of animals, and you got somewhat healthier, but not as healthy as you wanted. And what happened then?
Right. Yeah, it's been a ride. You know, it's even been a ride since I stopped writing the book, because as you know, it takes a while for a book, once you finish writing it, for it to be published. And then, you know, now it's a few years after that. But at that time, when I was 30, I'll be 40 this year, so that, if my math is correct, was 10 years ago, I was winded when I would walk up a flight of stairs, and I would stop halfway to check my text messages, but, you know, just kind of pretend to check them, but really just to catch my breath. And I was 30, and I had a master's in health, and I had been a longtime vegan, and I had been giving workshops by that point for years. I knew it all.
Workshops on being an animal rights advocate, or what were your workshops?
They were ongoing vegan.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, they were Veganism 101 workshops. I did them throughout New York City and then at colleges and universities. I also did activism workshops as well, but for the most part at that time it was, you know, focused around how to go vegan. And so I knew why this was happening, and yet I couldn't control it. And I went to the doctor, and my blood work was taken, and I was told that I was on my way to heart disease. And I was 30, you know, a longtime vegan at that point. And so I was away with my former partner, my ex-wife, Marianne Sullivan, who I run Our Hen House with, who's my co-host. And we were on vacation and I was given a press copy. I stopped by the VegNews office. Of course, now I work for VegNews as well. But I stopped by the VegNews office. I was given a press copy of a movie called Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead, where the guy who stars in it, Joe Cross, basically juiced his way to health, in a very dramatic way, driving across the United States. And I did a juice fast because of that. Everything kind of came together. I was tired of being tired, and it didn't become about weight loss for me. And that was the big shift. It wasn't about losing weight. It was about the fact that my body could no longer crave or handle really unending amounts of brown fried food. It was craving, for the first time in my life, vegetables. I really didn't even eat broccoli until I was 30. So that's what happened next.
So you went on this 10-day juice fast, and that inspired you. You didn't go, I fasted when in my 20s and went straight back to junk food, but you didn't do that. You were able to lower include more. You were excited about vegetables. Mm-hmm. And then you continued this on a monthly basis.
Yeah, it wasn't so much about the fast as it was about the mentality that I brought to the fast. Mm-hmm. It's not even a fast because I was consuming a lot of calories, but just for the sake of discussion, we'll call it a juice fast. It wasn't about that for me. It was like a hard line in the sand where I was giving my body and my brain a chance to reset. And I don't think everyone needs to do it. I don't think everyone needs to do a juice fast to accomplish this. For me, that's what did it. But there are a lot of different ways that people can bring a different mentality to the way that they're consuming. For me, it was juicing because I needed something that was like that big of a rule, that big of a hard line in the sand, something that gave me a break from thinking about it. And what I found when I was giving my body a chance to reset was that just as I had decided that my truth previously had been to no longer consume animal products, was that my new truth was that I needed to eat a goddamn vegetable. And so I did. I started to crave vegetables. And at the same time, I was arming myself with the information. I read Eat to Live like 30 times. I started to learn about, the effect that foods have on your moods. I had struggled with depression. I had struggled with anxiety, and I didn't want to feel like crap anymore. And it suddenly wasn't about what I looked like. It was about whether I was actually taking care of myself.
But you did change how you look like, and when that happened, it also changed how people reacted to you.
Yeah, and what you're talking about now is still something I think about a lot because my physical appearance changes a lot. But the reason I even got the book deal was because I wrote an article for Mind Body Green about how when I lost nearly 100 pounds, which is ultimately what happened at that time, the world started treating me very differently. And I didn't even care that much about that article. It was actually declined from my Huffington Post blog. They wouldn't publish it because they saw it as self-promotional in terms of bringing up Fat, Sick, and Nearly Dead. So then a friend of mine said, try and publish it here. I had never heard of Mind Body Green. I said, but okay, whatever, that's fine. The next day I woke up and it had 100,000 Facebook shares. So I got approached to write this book because of the fact that I was talking about something that nobody would talk about ever, which is that when you change your appearance so drastically and you go from a category of something that the world had previously pushed aside into something that the world was suddenly celebrating or at least accepting, everything gets turned on its head. And that's what happened to me.
Give us some examples of what you mean.
Yeah. Men would hold doors for me. Women would compliment my blazer. I would kind of be eyeballing someone holding a Starbucks, and I would kind of be like looking around for the Starbucks, and 3 people would say, it's over there. People were nicer to me. My neighbor downstairs I actually talk about this in my book. I lived in a walk-up in New York at the time. A neighbor in my building introduced himself to me for the first time to tell me how amazing I looked, and he brought it up constantly. My mother acted as though I had just won the Nobel Peace Prize. It was such a big deal to everyone else. And I started to realize that my own bodily integrity had been, for some reason, everyone thought that it was their business and that it was their business to comment on my body. And it pissed me off. Like, I got really angry to learn about how previously thoroughly marginalized I had actually been. And it wasn't until I got invited to the Cool Kids Club that I realized the depths of it.
So I have to mention your TED Talk, because that is maybe 2 full minutes of the 8 minutes of your TED Talk when you say, when you switched your focus from vanity to self-care, which is beautiful transformation, then the outside world started treating you differently in a very superficial way.
Even though Jasmine hadn't changed, well, you had changed, but you hadn't changed that drastically. They changed
their response to her changed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I am obsessed with your TED Talk. I've been clicking up its views because I've watched it 4 times. It's called Compassion Unlocks Identity, so that people can go watch it. It's a little over 8 minutes. It has completely, well, I was going to say it has completely set me free from self-berating, but I'm only like 3 days in, because that's when I watched it. So we're going to check in again.
Well, it took Jasmine a week to get vegan, so get on it, girl.
Right, okay. Because I have been struggling big time in the last year or so with self-berating in a really big way. And part of the reason it's helped to set me free is because you talk about we need to see ourselves as our grandmother sees us. My grandmother was Dotsie. I have her name. And she saw me the way your grandmother saw her. And if we could just only do that, I'm sure there are some people out there that didn't have a great relationship with their grandmother. I recognize that, and I hear you. But many of us did, and I saw my grandmother as a fairy tale princess queen or something. Right? Everything about her was extraordinary, and she saw me as extraordinary in every single way. So I've been working on this for 72 hours, but I just want you to weigh in on your grandmother and give them a little teaser of that TED Talk, of that aspect that you talk about. How can we see ourselves like our grandmother saw us?
Well, you effectively made me cry. And I'm so happy to hear about your journey here. And I also appreciate the reminder today to see myself the way my grandmother saw me. Because like I said, it's an ongoing journey. We're not just going to reach it and then it's not going to be a struggle. But my grandmother was my strength. She was the most beautiful person I've ever known. And at the end of her life, a benign brain tumor took over her body, and she wound up in a wheelchair. And she was also someone who was very head-turning, beautiful, very ravishing. And suddenly, as soon as I would wheel her around in her wheelchair, nobody would look at her anymore. They would look at me instead. They would address me about her. And she would look them in the eye and answer for herself. And that's because she never answered to anyone else. And she is the only person in my life who didn't care if I had lost, nearly 100 pounds, as long as I was actually living in alignment with what was best for me. She believed in me from the beginning. And like you said, a lot of our grandmothers had that, and they just brought this gentleness and this sweetness. And she was such a mentor to me, and still is, even though she's been gone now for 5 years or 6 years. I carry with me the mentality that she brought into her life, which was kindness, and she wouldn't have stopped that with herself. We are so mean to ourselves. I mean, I have friends who come from abusive childhoods. I'm thinking of one friend in particular, and she tells me these stories of her as a little kid, like horrible, horrible abuse, like with no food whatsoever, and like being left for days at a time. It's an egregious situation. And now I hear her struggling in similar ways in her relationship. And I say, do you look at little you and think that this is what you wanted for you? If we can look at ourselves as if we were that kid standing on the counter looking for the food that doesn't exist, then we might extend compassion to ourselves. And we cannot, in good faith, extend that compassion elsewhere, whether it's to our kids or to our communities, unless we have it starting on the inside. So that's what my grandmother taught me.
That's what you mean when you say in the TED Talk, the bully is ourselves.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I recognize that a lot of us have at some point been given a bad lot in life, and we don't need to perpetuate it anymore. It actually is as simple as shifting our mentality. It is actually that simple about just using different language. I have been addicted to negative self-talk. I have been addicted to the thoughts in my head. I have to intercept them and change my neural pathways and like apologize to myself sometimes 100 times a day until that becomes the new normal. To not like say, I hate you under my breath all day long, but to say, oh, didn't mean that. I actually love you. That's what it means to make amends with ourselves. That's what it means to show up differently in terms of treating ourselves with true compassion. I don't think we can treat ourselves with true compassion while we're eating animals, because it's not an extension of our worldview. It's not an extension of what we want to be doing, which is to like cause pain to other groups. Well, similarly, I don't think we can actually show up with compassion if we're saying I hate you to ourselves 100 times a day. That's not going to help anyone.
So you're talking about the very important shift that we have to make emotionally for ourselves, and that helps us with how we deal with stress in our world, which the three of us used food to deal with stress. What about the physical food addiction part? I want to make sure, because I find that people blame themselves for craving foods when these foods are addictive. Right. How did you get over that part? You learned to sort of take care of yourself and love yourself more, but what about the actual addiction? Because we can love ourselves and still have that physical craving.
And for me, that's where the juice fasting came in. And like I said, I don't think that's necessary for everyone, but my personality type, I needed that in my calendar. I needed to put in my calendar that I'm going to do a 10-day juice fast this month and a 3-day juice fast next month and a 10-day one the following and then a 3-day one. And I did that for 3 years. And so if food addictions started to creep back up, I didn't go crazy, but I knew that I had a juice fast coming up. It was in the calendar. I moved my social obligations around it. That's how I treated it, almost like a job. And in that time, I would not only be juice fasting, but I would be learning about the power of vegetables. When you go to the store and you go in the snack aisle, you see a whole lot of company names. And those companies want you to buy the product. And so they're creating it with a whole lot of research to make sure that you're going to go back for that over and over again. Whereas if you look in the vegan section of the grocery store, otherwise known as the produce section, you're not going to see a whole lot of company names. You're going to see a whole lot of fruits and vegetables sitting there. And if we start to pivot it and incorporate more and more whole foods onto our plates, whether or not we still have the kind of like vegan junky transition food as like a tiny little part of the plate, as long as the basis of it is fruits and vegetables, then you start to rid yourself of those addictions. And those addictions are real. That's another reason why we have to be compassionate with ourselves, because we are part of the problem. We are part of the system when we're picking up that same food over and over again, because that's the thing that goes down our gullet with the exact right amount of speed and hits that part of our brain that cannot possibly be sated. But you can actually be sated if you just fill up on fruits and vegetables.
So it takes time, but it can happen. And sometimes we'll have times where we'll go back to, succumb to some cravings, and that means we need to focus more on the vegetables to get away from that.
Right, and find out what your juice fast is. Maybe your juice fast is a juice fast. Maybe your juice fast is going 2 weeks, with a goal to read 3 books about, veganism in that time. Maybe it's hiring a vegan friendly nutritionist for 2, change it up. It's sort of like moving around your furniture. Change up something in your life for a very specific period of time and stick to it. I couldn't do it without a juice fast, but a lot of people feel that they can. They can do a lot of smoothies and soups and then a big salad for dinner. I would personally have found that to be like a slippery slope into going to get the seitan piccata. But when it all aligns, then we give our bodies a break, and we don't think about it as weight loss, but think about it as like just thriving in your life. If we're, like there was a time, this is in my book, there was a time in my young 20s when I worked for Weight Watchers, and I had to keep my weight to a certain number in order to keep my job. But I couldn't keep it there. So I secretly joined Jenny Craig to take the weight off.
Oh, that is a great story.
and keep my job with Weight Watchers.
Oh my gosh.
And the reason why nothing was working, even though if you looked at me, you would have been like, she looks healthy. She looks like she's vibrant. Inside, all I was doing was thinking about the fact that I had these Jenny Craig meals, and I was vegetarian then. There was only one vegetarian option at the time. So that's all I ate, was that one thing. Inside, I was wondering how much candy I could eat after my weigh-in on Tuesday night, because I considered the time between weigh-in and midnight to be free time. Mm-hmm. I was doing nothing to get to the root of the issue or to actually feed myself. Just like when I was a kid, food was a mechanism for changing my body, not a mechanism for satisfaction or for nourishment.
What do you advise people who say they can't cook vegan, they don't have time, it's too expensive, all these reasons why? What would you tell them?
Well, nowadays I would say invest in an air fryer if you can, because that to me
Dotsie
is like,
says that too.
I
actually
did that in December.
I'm not a very good cook, but I eat just fine. And I don't follow recipes. I just kind of like throw some stuff into the air fryer and call it a day. I think if you are using like no or low oil and eating 75% of your plate is vegetables, and then you go for a healthy sauce, like a tahini-based sauce, it's actually very, very easy. But there's a lot of like mental blocks people have to get through. And, that's another reason why, I'm writing a book right now, and it is a 30-day guide to being vegan. So these are questions I'm asking myself in my book writing, like what are the mental blocks people need to get through? And honestly, it's just about trying new foods, whether that means going totally vegan for someone, which I hope it does, or it means going vegan 5 days a week for now on their way to going totally vegan. There are ways to kind of lean into it so that you're not afraid of the permanence of the word vegan, which is a lot of people's fear. They don't want to label themselves something because they feel they're setting themselves up to fail. So that would be my main advice, is to learn a couple sauces, how to make a couple sauces, put them in your refrigerator, get an air fryer, don't overthink it. If I overthought it, I never would have started Our Hen House. If I realized how hard it is how much paperwork is involved in having a nonprofit, or how much production is entailed in producing one podcast episode, I never would have done it. But I felt this urge for starting a podcast, and I did it. Just like one day I was like, I'm gonna do a juice fast, and I did it. Sometimes you just kind of have to lean in and just agree to keep that promise to yourself. And part of it is surrounding yourself with people who will cheerlead you along the way.
Yeah. And I think take a page from your grandmother's book and remember that no one gets to define you. That's your job. And so if you are going to go on this journey, you're the one that gets to define success and enjoyment and adventure. And so I love focusing on all of the things you're going to bring in and not the things you're going to take out.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds cliche at this point to say veganism is about abundance, not deprivation, but cliches are cliches for a reason. Veganism is about abundance, not deprivation. When I went vegan, a whole world of food opened up to me, a whole cuisine, a whole lot of tastes and depths of flavor that I had never before been exposed to, a whole community of people who are passionate about this, a whole world of social justice. I developed such strong meaning for myself in my life that there absolutely was no turning back. I got the greatest loves of my life by way of veganism. Mm-hmm. I got the bestest friends of my life. The most important, rich jobs that I've ever had were because I wanted to devote my life to changing the world for animals. And what I learned in the course of my journey that is talked about in my book is that that was hindered ultimately until I put myself as a central figure in changing the world for animals. I needed to change the world for this animal, myself, and respect my own animal rights. Once we start to put that together, the whole world opens up.
I think, and so my friends out there, that might be the greatest PSA ever for veganism is not a diet.
That's right. Thank you so much, Jasmin. You have so much to offer. And folks, this is an amazing book. And you're really funny, too.
Thank you.
We're really excited to
And
read
the TED
your
Talk,
next book.
Compassion Unlocks Identity.
Yes.
We're like that. Book, TED Talk. Book, TED Talk. Switch it up.
So thank you so much, Jasmin Singer, for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. This was a true joy, and I admire both of you so much. And I'm so happy you're out there with your stories and leveraging the voices of others, because we are all in this together.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switch4good.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.